Take one.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the number 7 podcast for StudioRat HQ. My name is Stephen Couch, and I'm here with Richard Kaplan and Derek Jablonski.
Hello.
This is, as you can see, if you watched our last podcast, in which we did Limp Bizkit, we're wearing the exact same things because we're doing these sequentially. This particular podcast is going to be about a Argentinian band called A.N.I.M.A.L. That's every letter has a dot after it, so it's almost like an acronym. But
well, what it is an acronym.
okay.
Each letter has a meaning in Spanish, and it's been explained to me before, but I can't repeat it word for word.
Right. Okay.
But they're basically known as A.N.I.M.A.L.
Right. A.N.I.M.A.L. Okay.
They did 3 albums with me at Indigo.
Right.
The one that we're going to be discussing, Poder Latino, which means Latin power, was co-produced with Max Cavalera from Sepultura.
Okay, so don't confuse Animal with the band and the Animals that brought us. Let's see, they brought us House of the Rising Sun.
Right.
Okay.
I also worked with them at Indigo.
Yeah.
And with Eric Burden and with War. So I've had that whole combination in front of me. But this is the band Animal.
Which is harassed, our Indians died while fighting.
Oh, okay. That's what it means?
That's what it says here. Harassed.
Okay.
Yeah, our Indians died while fighting.
Okay.
Groove metal from Argentina.
And I had done, this is my second album that I've done with a group from Argentina. I had done Elin Chester years before that on a album that made it big down there but not up here, and it was more of a jazz album. And then along comes Animal after I had done a number of the heavy metal albums, wanting to get a similar sort of vibe and sound, and indigo heavy, brick in your face kind of sound. And I met Andreas, who's the singer and guitarist. This is a band where we're looking at a 3-piece band.
Right.
Honest 3-piece band where the singer is also the guitarist. There's a bass player and a drummer, and the 3 of them make a live reproducible sound that is literally unbelievable. These guys are huge.
I was gonna say they must have, because I listen to their albums and it's pretty hard, pretty tough metal to be reproducing live.
Yeah, it's a huge sound. Let me take care of a few business things before we really get into it. A few things to take care of. We just had a brief dropout, so if you see a change in the view, sorry about that. But just getting back to a little bit about us, this is StudioRat HQ. We are available at facebook.com/StudioRat HQ. We post photos. We converse with you guys. You guys ask questions. We try to answer them as best as possible. You can also see us at www.StudioRatHQ.com. That's where, if you are not able to watch this video on YouTube, you can download and listen to the podcast. It's also available at iTunes. Just type in Studio, one word, Rat, one word, HQ, the third part, and you should see our previous podcasts.
Keep in mind that it's only on iTunes where you have to separate the words with a space.
Right.
If you're looking for us on the internet, it is just www.StudioRatHQ.com, all one word, small letters, StudioRatHQ.com.
And
same with Facebook.
And YouTube, too, actually, youtube.com/StudioRatHQ. And the website is currently under construction, so
it would probably be helpful. It would probably be helpful on some of these albums, like this one, if one of us spoke Spanish or had some sort of
I was thinking of that.
or
we had
interpretation, because that's
right.
we're kind of limiting our crowd. You know what I mean?
No,
Well,
I agree.
interestingly, the band picked me to work with them on 3 of their albums, all of which went gold, which is a real rarity down in South America to sell that many albums to such a limited audience. And they picked me because of the albums that I had worked on, that they liked the sound of, the big indigo heavy sound. And they didn't care that I didn't speak Spanish particularly with any of those groups. I did some of the biggest Spanish-speaking groups there are: Juan Gabriel, Alex
Tree.
Laura with El Tree, and Jose Jose, Rosio Dorca, and Lola Beltran. And I was always on there with somebody in the band, always spoke good enough English that we could communicate, and we of course could communicate through the music, and we got really good albums for all of the artists.
Nice.
Well, Max Cavalera was there on this one, and he's obviously bilingual. Were the other members English speaking as well, or just purely Spanish?
Andres, the lead guitarist and vocalist, is also he was on the first album learning to speak English. By the time we got to the third album that I did with him, he spoke pretty fluent English, and he always had a woman with him who lives in Los Angeles, Maria, who would act as a translator for a good part of the session with the guys that didn't speak any English.
Do you remember what record company they were with at the time?
No, I don't.
I believe they were with Universal.
Is it Universal?
Yeah.
Well, because
I think it's Universal, but it's Universal.
Yeah, subsidiary.
A different version of Universal. Here's and it'll be posted on the website also, the triple gold platinum album award that we got for that album, and they.
Well, because this is another situation where it's like, who called you on this one? Did Max say, "Hey, I'm bringing this band in. I need your help with it"?
This was Max didn't get in until after I had already done an album or two with them.
Okay.
And they called because they had seen the El Tree albums with Alex Laura that I had done, and they just liked the sound and the clarity and the intensity that I was getting on albums. And again, many of the albums that we did, the band would be at the studio for weeks or months.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have that kind of budget. They had a good budget, but we were constantly working 12 to 14-hour days and really cramming it to get everything recorded and ready for release. But as you may well have noticed, this is a 3-piece band. And by a 3-piece band, they were a genuine 3-piece band.
Well, Richard, you just mentioned budget. What was the day rate, including yourself, for Indigo Ranch in its prime?
Generally around $2,500 a day with me, $1,200 to $1,800 without me. And they were a band that, really wanted what we had and were willing to come in for a couple of weeks, and we'd work our butt off and put the best show on that we could. It wasn't like the big North American bands that could come in for 6 weeks to 2 months and record at their leisure. We would work many 12-plus hour days and cram to get things on tape. And on this third album, the one that we're talking about, Poder Latino, they also had guest stars. They had Jimmy DeGracio from Suicidal Tendencies and Robert Trujillo from Suicidal Tendencies. He went on to be the bass player for
Yeah.
Metallica and
Right.
great
Everybody
fame.
knows that.
Yeah,
Well,
and
I
He
we
don't,
hit the
I don't,
lotto.
I don't know which album it was, but one of these three albums also had Lemmy from Motorhead come in. I don't think it was this one.
that was a different album.
What was he like?
Well, that was one of the most exciting days in Indigo's history.
Wow.
Um, he came in, and um, everybody thinks that he is the great screamer of all time. That his vocal, that you probably have to be 50 feet away from him to, save your ears while he's singing because he screams so loud. He sings so softly, but he's got that rough voice. It's like,
Right.
What was that?
and
What was that again?
he he's
Is that
got to be about this far from the mic to even hear him. Um, but he gets that incredible vocal effect, and he was also one of the big stars on the famous Indigo Cactus, where artists would come in and go out about an eighth of a mile from the studio. It was a 60-acre ranch, and they'd go out on the edge of the cliff overlooking the canyon, and we had this huge prickly pear cactus, and every artist would want to find a new leaf or new cactus piece, and they were generally bigger than your head
right?
to write their name on. And during this set of sessions, Lemmy went out onto the cliff and wrote his name on the cactus, and it was one of the ones that was always shown with a smile and a little bit of pride in our heart because he was such a great performer. And he performed a song with Andreas. In fact, it was a remake of an old song, and unbelievable day. And then
Yeah.
we all sat around and we had um, lunch and dinner together, and that was it.
Well, that's what's interesting is
Sounds nice.
people are talking about records being made and their cost. Just to hang out at Indigo for a week, for the most part, is going to put a band back $15,000.
Pretty close.
Yeah.
And then also as a guest on this album, not only did we have Robert, who later went on to Metallica, on bass, but we also had Christian from Fear Factory
Right.
on stand-up four-string, big symphonic bass, playing slap bass
Oh
along
wow.
with it, and that's where I really met and got to know Christian, and I later ended up making several pedals for him that he used for the rest of time and on tour that gave him additional bass and kind of a clarity to his bass sound that he wasn't able to get anywhere else. And he even gave me credit on the next Fear Factory album as having been one of the creators of his bass sound and special effects units.
Awesome.
Now, on
That's a good title.
the particular album that we're talking about, there were
Yeah.
also a few special effects used that one of which you see quite commonly, one of which you rarely see. The one that's more common, and these will be posted on our uh,
Facebook page, most likely.
Facebook page, is this MXR Distortion
Can you lift
Plus.
that up a bit? I can't see. Oh, now I can see it. Okay, great.
Is it in the middle?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a script logoed MXR Distortion Plus, one of the very early ones, and that was used on a lot of the guitar sounds. But we also used a very rare pedal, which is this Electro Harmonix Hog's Foot, which is a
Never seen
bass
that.
booster, which was part of my incentive and idea for making Christian his tools for his bass sound, because
Question about
we
those.
had already made the bass booster, and then when Christian tried the Hog's Foot, which had been used on most of the rest of the album, he liked my bass booster better and commissioned me to build him a set for his live shows.
Can't you?
What were you going to ask, Derek?
In the studio, if you didn't have something on hand that he wanted or someone always played with, like theirs just broke or they forgot it, couldn't you mimic? I mean, you being able to create pedals, couldn't you mimic, what a wah does, or couldn't you mimic a bass boost pedal from the console or using an amp or doing something?
Sometimes,
Yeah.
but we tried to get the actual sounds recorded to tape so that you knew what you were dealing with as you did each subsequent sound. Of course, being a three-piece group, this is a band that would play the live track, and they had to be completely satisfied, as did I as producer and Max, that we had on tape the bass, drums, and guitar that we wanted, and then we would do overdubs if and when they were called for, especially vocal overdubs.
Well, that's an interesting point because I was doing a session years ago in London, actually, and this band came in and I was an assistant, and so the guitarist was like, here's my tone, here's the sound I want to get, and the producer said, I'll get that later, let's just get you a clean tone.
I've heard that too.
And he was never able to replicate that sound, and so that guitarist kind of walked away disappointed.
I've heard that too.
It's an interesting point that you said, Richard. Try and get it to tape. And
I learned that early on, that no matter what you do, you can never get that magic moment that happens when you get it actually live to tape. You can never, with any amount of effect, and believe me, Indigo had 800 pedals, 400 guitar amps, every make and model of EQ and limiter and tone booster and stuff like that you could imagine. Yet we were very particular about getting the sounds on tape that work together, and stacked up together, rather than saying, "Oh, we'll catch it in the mix."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that like you said, I was just an assistant at that time, and it was a good lesson to learn, because the guitarist walked away from that whole session disappointed, and I don't know if the producer even got what he wanted, because I think he had the idea. My guess is that he really didn't like the guitarist's tone. And so he kind of thought, well, I'll manipulate the situation and just say, we'll give you your tone you want later, when in fact, because there was a lot of pedals in the mix and all that.
But even these days with all the digital recording, all the Pro Tools or whatever you use, a lot of it, from what I've seen, is let's just get a dry signal and we'll reamp it, or take your wah out of the take your wah out, let's just plug in directly, we can go back in and put it in later, or take your flange out or whatever, and we can just go back in and put it in afterwards. But that kind of
I think that's a particularly bad move.
Yeah.
Especially, let's start with your first example, the wah. You're never, ever, I don't care who you are or how good you think you are at it, going to recreate what the guitarist was going to do as he stepped on the wah pedal during a live performance. Yeah. It just is not going to happen. You may get some wah effect that you like, but it isn't going to be the same one that the guitarist would have done. Same goes for flanging, phasing, EQing, distorting, or anything. You're not going to get the effect that they had in mind as they were playing, what they thought they were going to hear coming out of the speakers, if you don't allow them to put that actual effect to the recorded tape or to the recorded Pro Tools hard drive. It just can't be done. You'll get a sound, but it won't be the same one. And oftentimes you'll see bitter disappointment in the eyes of the musicians who wanted to record their particular sound, or a sound that they were getting with some array of pedals and or amps that were in the Indigo arsenal, and the producer would say, no, we're not going to do that now, we'll get it in the mix, and it never would happen. And they had spent all night the night before putting a string of guitar pedals or a string of amps together to get some particular sound that they thought would go perfectly in some spot in a song, and then only to hear a producer say, "Nah, we want to just record it dry because I know what I want to do in the mix."
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or they want their options open, I think is,
Yeah, I think anytime you can get the finished sound recorded to the hard drive or to the tape recorder, that it's to your benefit to do it.
What
Well,
about
Now, a
that,
on?
lot of people will say, "Well, but you can't undo it. You know, if well, suppose it doesn't work out to be exactly what you want. At least we'd have the dry sound." Um, you always have the option of taking a direct split off of a guitar and recording it.
Mhm.
Although, in my 35 years of recording bands, that split, I can't ever remember it being used if we got the sound that we were actually looking for as the alternative, simultaneously recorded track.
right.
What about in the context of a delay? Like okay, you set the meter, you set it, you know what you're at, everything. Say we're recording at 100 beats per minute, and the guitar player's in there and he's playing his delay pedal with single notes, and you can tell it's kind of sloppy. Would you be like, all right, give me a dry signal, and we'll go back in and we'll actually, digitally type it in so it's correct?
I would agree with
Now,
that in performance, though.
not really. Normally, what we would do is have him replay at the corrected rate so that it was on tape. That way, when you're doing overdubs, you don't have to have 1,000 things going on in the background and a bunch of effects plugged into the console or to Pro Tools running at the same time. You have on tape, and every time that you overdub, that effect is already there on tape,
No,
unchanging.
I agree with Derek's point and what you were saying, Richard, is that if the delay is an essential part of the performance, no, you got to capture that. If it's an after effect that you're doing in the mix, like this part has a dropout or whatever, or there's a fade there, or a sustained bit, and you want delay on that,
Hmm.
go ahead and add it afterwards. Great, but if it's an essential part, because I use a lot of delay in my playing, and I've been in studios where they've tried that, and I'm like, no, 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 I need the sound is part of the performance, especially
That's right.
with
Yeah, it just
delays.
doesn't
Although
feel
I
right.
completely agree with you, Stephen, there are times, and many times, that's why we had such good studio delay units
Hmm.
in our rack. There are many times where you do add the delay in the mixing, um, especially with vocals,
Right.
and oftentimes with guitar, bass, drums, or whatever. Um, and even with vocals, many times we would put in the vocal booth a Electro-Harmonix Memory Man, which is a delay unit
Hmm.
with several other effects available on it, or some other delay pedal in the vocal booth and set it to the song as the artist was maybe doing a first run pass through, so that we had even the delayed stuff going directly to tape with the vocal, so that the singer could sing to the effect. Just like you're saying, if that's part of your
Yeah.
sound, it becomes part of the way you project, part of the way you sing,
What
part of the way you play whatever instrument it is.
what
Yeah.
about
No.
for
Sorry.
reverb? For reverb, did you have like a plate reverb?
Did
Sorry,
we have a
I'm
plate
I'm
reverb?
I'm falling
We,
all
we
over
had
myself
four we
here.
had four EMT plates,
Yeah.
an echo plate two, which
Uh-huh.
are all big steel sheet reverbs. We had an EMT 250, um,
Well,
two
wait, Richard.
two Lexicon
Let,
digital reverbs.
Yeah,
let me
let's.
interrupt
Um,
you there, Richard. Sorry about that. Let me interrupt you because I just thought, I was like, there could be a whole generation of people that see reverbs like plate reverb. What's a plate?
Right. It's
When
not
Richard's
digital.
saying plate, you're literally talking about usually an aluminum, isn't that right, Richard?
no, it's
Aluminum.
steel.
Oh, steel.
Just
Okay,
hanging in a room.
steel
It's
plate.
cold rolled steel
Right.
that you know how when you take a cookie sheet and you go thing and you get that twang to it. This is it, like an enormous cookie sheet, 4 feet by 6 feet, mounted by springs on each corner. And by springs, I'm talking about springs with
Industrial.
hundreds of pounds of pressure applied to them that are holding this plate taut, and then on the plate in the middle of it, or pretty near the middle of it, is a transducer that, like a speaker, you have a voice coil that's moving in and out to the sound wave that's being sent to it through the amplifier. On a plate, you have a piece of metal as the cone actually attached to the plate, so the whole plate is vibrating to the signal you're sending it. And then there's a couple of pickups spread across the plate that are picking up the delayed or reverbing sound to that sent thing. They're the actual transducers on the plate.
Right.
And most of the good plates were made by a company called E.N.I.M.A.L out of Germany. And there's a lot of other companies that tried to make plates, including Echo Plate in the United States, and they did make some good plates. We had a really good Echo Plate too, which was part of our arsenal.
Well, the quality of the steel with the German plates
that's the thing.
Yeah.
The EMT had a deal with the biggest steel cold roller in Germany, where they had every piece of cold rolled steel of that thickness shipped to them, and they got to literally try each piece to see how it sounded, to see what the frequency response and the reverb qualities were. They would select maybe a half a dozen or a dozen sheets out of 1,000, send the rest back to the manufacturer to be used as steel for like making automobiles, or steel to be used in appliances, or whatever other use that flat sheet of steel would be put to. And they kept the dozen best pieces to be made into EMT plate reverbs.
Well,
nobody else ever had that kind of opportunity to experiment with 1,000 pieces of steel and reject 990 of them.
Do you think there are even today? I know that we have some friends that all three of us have friends that have a major studio in Santa Monica. They're trying to get their plate reverbs installed, but is there really even? Yeah, exactly. Is there?
It's a small town.
Are there any plate reverbs left? You know what I mean?
Yes, almost all of them are left. Very few of them have gone completely out of service. Awesome. They are coveted. They're like dinosaur eggs, and people desperately try to keep them running. And because I had so many plates, became an expert trained technician in tuning the plates and care and maintenance of the plates. I still to this day have in my workshop a kit of EMT tools made for me by the manufacturer that include plexiglass spacer rings and tools for tightening and tensioning the plates. And I took care of many of the people's reverb plates on the West Coast for years. I mean, I was flown all over the West Coast when I wasn't in the middle of producing or engineering an album to tune plates for studios. And after you're done tuning the plate, when you have just the right tension on that piece of that cookie sheet, as it were, the sound becomes amazing. It's one of the best reverb sounds known.
Well, that's why all the simulators
every set of plugins always has a plate reverb sound on it, but never has a plate reverb actual
no, that's
perfect simulation. It can't be done.
Right.
And every plate reverb is different. Every single one of them has a unique personality, which is why, I mean, if they were all the same, I would have had one of them or maybe two of them. But we had 4 different plate reverbs made by EMT and one made by Echo Plate, because each one of them had a personality of its own. And they would all be used for different artists in different places, depending upon the sweetness or thickness or whatever it was that was necessary for the song.
Well, yeah, we got a great detailed response here, but that was the whole point, because all of us that use plugins and or even guitarists that have the spring reverb, which is nothing more than a spring vibrating, but that plate reverb, what does that mean? Well, it was literally a plate, but way back to the record we were talking about, Animal. You know,
Animal.
you were talking about getting sounds and using pedals and all that. The sound is fairly consistent throughout the
Yes.
Animal records.
Yeah,
Not a lot of
absolutely.
not a lot of derivation in tones and all that. I guess that's what
Partly
they.
because of the rapidity that we had to
Okay,
on our recordings budget and time schedule. We just ended up getting a great bass sound, a great drum sound, a great guitar sound, and a great vocal sound, and flew from there. The vocals have the largest variety of tones
hmm
because we would use various mics for various parts depending upon how screamed or how distorted we wanted it to be. But as far as the main rhythm guitar, and in a three-piece band, we're talking about a band that would play the whole song, and then when they go out and play live, they'd play the same thing, and they could
right,
do it.
right.
Just wondering if you've ever heard this. Some friends of mine, before they had gotten signed, the label told them that America fears a three-piece. You need to bring in a second guitar player. Have you ever heard anything silly like that in all your years?
Oh yeah, um, I think it came,
Yeah.
after Eric Clapton,
Yeah.
and that you couldn't have a three-piece band that could compete with that.
Cream,
Um,
you mean?
Cream.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, no other three-piece band was ever able to compete on that level as a three-piece band. Well, occasionally, but for the most part, they couldn't pull it off live, even if they could pull it off in the studio.
No,
And
the last major trio, Nirvana, they had a touring guitarist, Pat Schmier. He went on to join the
Foo
uh,
Fighters.
Foo Fighters, yeah, but he was their touring guy. He went
Well,
on the
he was
road
from
with
the
them.
Germs, and he's done other
Right.
stuff too.
Yeah,
because
yeah, of course. But
it's hard to get a big enough three-piece sound, and then you come down to there was a band from Australia that we recorded that was a two-piece band,
Oh wow,
and
yeah.
it was a guitar that basically got the bass and the guitar sound. Uh, Totally unbelievable what this guy would get out of one guitar.
mm,
But as far as three-piece bands go, Animal was as good as any three-piece band I've ever heard.
yeah,
I did see one two-piece band. It was an it was like a
well,
90s, it was a 90s alt rock band.
the White Stripes.
Oh no, this was before them. This was um like Toadies or Toad and the Wet Sprocket, that type of
Toadies.
day. And there's
Yeah.
I
two
know.
guys. There's the drummer and the singer and guitar player. And I saw him
Hmm.
play at a festival like that, and I was like, "What in the world?
Yeah,
Are
yeah,
you kidding? Two guys?
And they
That's
get a
it?"
huge sound.
yeah.
Because one of the things about not having as many guys and not having everything quadrupled and doubled is that you get this huge sound. People think you've got to double or quadruple things to get a big sound. Oftentimes, a single instrument playing a part correctly will get a bigger sound than all the doublings in the world.
I take it this was another situation where everybody played live in the room.
Yes,
What about vocals?
vocals were um, often done where Andreas would sing in the vocal booth with his guitar plugged in outside the vocal booth so that it wasn't drowning him out.
Hmm
And if we could get the vocals live, we would. If not, they would be great scratch vocals that could then be overdubbed too, and or added to, where we might add a different mic and pedal setup to the choruses or the bridge or something like that.
Well, there's a pattern I'm hearing here with Indigo records, particularly with this genre, the very heavy stuff, is that a lot of the effects, even on vocals and all that, were all derived from pedals,
Yes,
not outboard gear.
yes, and that's, I think, unusual
Yeah, it is.
in the recording business, that most people were afraid to do that at the pedal level because they didn't think the quality was good enough for a vocal.
Well, I don't know if they,
But
but, but
that's
that's
pure BS. I mean, if you can get a guitar and the full frequency response of a guitar uh, to be acceptable through a pedal, and I mean a well-made pedal. There are pedals that definitely weren't up to the job. then you absolutely could get a vocal to have a full frequency response through a pedal. And if you
Well,
could dial in the sounds that you wanted, zingo.
well, but there's a catch 22 to that, because a lot of these pedals that we're talking about, you personally went through and modified,
That's true.
which means that you might have actually increased the quality of it. But
Yeah,
furthermore,
yeah,
my immediate guess, because I've done pedals with vocals a few times, is that the noise. It's very noisy. So
They
what?
can't. They can be, but there again, it's kind of stupidity in the recording process that's caused that. Uh, in order for a pedal to be matched up to a microphone, you can't just plug a microphone into a pedal and expect to get anything but noise.
Right.
You've got to bring that mic up to guitar level minus 18
Hmm.
and 10,000 ohm impedance to get into the pedal and get full frequency response. And most microphones were either low or high impedance. If they were low impedance, they were like 50 ohm. You feed that into a 10K minus 18 dB level pedal, and
Hmm.
you're going to get noise. Or they were high impedance, where they were like 10,000 to 100,000 ohm, and there again, you didn't get the frequency response or the signal to noise ratio you needed. So we built actual line matchers.
yeah.
Some were transformered and some were active circuit that I built in the shop that would match the particular vocal mics that we most often used to the pedal so that you could get full response through them, so that the vocal mic was going into the pedal at the actual level that a guitar would.
Okay.
All right, so
Hmm.
these guys in Animal, he takes in his electric guitar into the vocal booth, which is another interesting choice. But the pattern, well, but the pattern here is, and I've seen this happen a lot, and I try to do my best with this when I'm working with others, and that is, you do whatever makes the artist comfortable. You don't
Mm-hmm.
go, you don't go, no, you can't take that guitar into the vocal booth. We'll overdub that later, because then it affects the vocal performance, or then it affects the guitar performance.
Exactly.
And it sounds like Indigo was masterful at supplying whatever the hell the artist wants. Let's try and set that situation up so that they're comfortable doing that.
We certainly tried,
Right, right.
and we took great pains in either manufacturing and building on our own devices that would allow us to do that.
Well,
And
let's.
that was one of the unique things that we had. We had things that would allow a guitarist who could play bass at the same time, or who could play guitar at the same time,
Mhm.
or who could even play acoustic piano at the same time, um, and not get a thinness or a noise that most studios would get if they tried to plug into a pedal.
Right.
Did you ever have anybody that would come into the studio and do all the instruments themselves?
Yes. I mean, what really comes to mind would be Lenny
I
Kravitz,
was about to say Lenny Kravitz does that.
who often would play darn near everything
Yeah.
and then go sing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool.
Um, just amazing. And it's not like he would start with a click track and then build on top of that. He might start with something like a Fender Rhodes and play a piano track, and then record a bass next, and then do the drums later.
Well, didn't his mom date David Bowie or something? So maybe that's the reason why.
Well, no, his mother
Uh,
was a TV star in her own right. She
on
Yes.
was
our
on the
own.
Yeah.
TV show The Jeffersons.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
but
And his wife was Lisa Bonet.
yeah, yeah, at the
Who,
time.
I mean, I think I still have a copy that my wife made out of sheer admiration for her, of the check that Lisa wrote for the first session that Lenny did in our studio, and Lisa came in and wrote a check for the session.
Yeah, I've seen that. um,
That's really neat.
but that's what I really enjoy hearing about. With this band Animal and other bands that went through Indigos, that like for example, another example just that we can talk about is people with major consoles in the room. We're not talking about some small, digital console or something, but a major console, and things like people putting things on the console and the engineer or whoever saying take that off the console. But what I had learned is like when you have a major client in the studio, you don't really tell them to take that off the console because they're a major paying
Do
client.
you mean like do you mean like a beverage?
Or their
Yes, like a
feet.
beverage, exactly.
Well, when you get up to having major clients, most of them already know better.
Well,
Yeah.
that's true as well. That's true as
You
well.
know, very rarely did I have anything spill into my main memory of something being spilled into the console wasn't a beverage, but was the band Fishbone was playing late one night, and they had a candle burning on one of those little stands that sits on top of the console to hold like a near field monitor, and they had taken the near field monitor off and put a big votive candle there, and the bass player swung around,
Oh
and as he
no.
swung the bass around, he hit the candle and knocked it onto the console,
Yeah.
and you know spilled hot wax everywhere, which took me weeks to clean up.
Yeah.
Fortunately, they were on a big record company who paid the fare for having the cleanup done. But it's something that most bands and producers have tremendous respect for the console by the time they reach that level. They've
Exactly.
already been through the studios that have had a bunch of soft drinks spilled on them and stuff like that, who had to buy a new console every couple of years. We had one console from the day that Mike Pinder and I opened the door of the studio in 1974 up to the day that we closed the studio in 2007. We had one big recording console. We had a bunch of little sidecar consoles that we would wheel in and out as we needed them. We had a Universal Audio 12 channel with Van Halen console
Yeah, that's on the
modules in
Flickr.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
We
That's on
we
the Facebook too.
That's
Actually,
on the
the
Facebook,
photo of
yeah.
those modules are now on Facebook. So
and we had a number of other console modules that we could use, but we really had one big recording console that served us well and got us that huge Indigo sound that not because it wasn't me.
Mhm.
That's the console that I was lucky enough to sit in front of, but it was basically guys like Dean Jensen and David Hawkins from Scenic Sounds in England that conceived of and put together the electronics for a console the likes of which has never been made again. People have tried to copy and make mic pre's that were similar, but nobody has ever gotten that kind of sound again. And Indigo had its own particular huge sound that when you listen to records, even from the day we started, all the way from the 70s on up to the day we closed, you would hear three records being played on the radio, and the one in the middle being the Indigo song, and it would just jump out of the speakers compared to the other two. Almost didn't matter what the other two or where the other two songs were recorded.
well,
Now,
a person on the Facebook page that you and I communicated with, Richard, has said he's trying to at least try to replicate some of those mic pre's, and he's going to send samples when they're completed. But he
That's cool.
he said he wanted to know about specific parts and et cetera, and he's going to try and at least get a similar type sound to the Angus.
Well, I can tell you that
part
if
of it
you
was Dean Jensen's parts matching ability. Dean Jensen was not only what I think of as the greatest audio electronics guy ever, he also was an electronics genius. Every major electronics company uses computer software as simulation programs as they're designing and building equipment. And Dean is the guy that designed and built all of that software for Hewlett Packard, and what was, up until the time he died, the famous piece of electronics design software ever made. And he had ways of matching parts that nobody I've ever known else has been able to do, including myself.
Okay, I gotta go back to the fishbone story for just a minute. You're talking
Okay.
about you're talking about physically taking a near field down and putting a big old candle there. Now,
I had already gone home.
I hope so. I couldn't imagine
Wouldn't
you
have
being
happened.
like.
Wouldn't have happened on my watch.
So do
Well,
you
that's the whole point. This people do this, but go ahead, Derek.
did you you know, a lot of bands go in and it is ritual. You'll light incense or candles or put up a picture of his girlfriend or whatever, you know, or his dearly departed mama. But regardless, did you notice a difference in the studio, ritualistics or like habits that bands did from like American bands to South American bands? Did you notice there was any?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Especially the South American bands would always bring stuff with them to be part of the decor. I mean, even Sepultura uh, brought an incredible dream catcher, which I to this day have hanging in my living room that they
It's
gave me as a gift.
the
Uh,
photo is in that dream catcher is in the control room photo,
that's
which I'm
right.
fairly certain is on the Facebook page. If it's not, I'll load it. But you
It's
can
at the
see
we
it.
had
console.
two
Yeah.
dream catchers in the studio. Another one was given to me by the singer from a band called Deadweight.
Okay.
And then they also, like Sepultura, would bring in their Brazilian flag
Hmm.
to be hung on the wall, and I don't mean
Beautiful.
like some little
Yeah, like.
2 foot flag. I mean a flag that would cover a wall. Um, and as did most of the South American bands, would bring in some large objects. I don't know how they got them in their suitcases or what they did, but they would bring in some things that were part of their, um, I don't know if it was ritual
Mhm.
or if it was just part of their comfort zone that
Right.
they wanted to have around them, like little mascots.
Yeah. Atmosphere. Create atmosphere.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Anything to create atmosphere.
Hmm.
Well,
Dim
I,
the
And
lights.
to make
Add
you
different
comfortable.
color. Dim the lights. Add different color light bulbs. Whatever.
yep. Yeah, I
We'd have
know.
that happen too, where we'd have to get up on ladder, get a tall ladder into the studio room to change the bulbs,
Right. Right.
to change the vibe, to put uh, uh, plastic light gels over the lighting system to get some color that we couldn't get through a bulb,
Hmm.
Hmm.
Hmm. Well, it goes back to this whole thread. Not only we're talking about
and
animal,
lots of candles.
Oh yeah.
animal, not only talking about animal, but the record, but also Indigo Ranch and recording techniques, and that is whatever it takes to get the performance. There are film directors like that too, and we talked a couple of podcasts back about going to the producer and the techniques used, and film directors are the same. Some will scare their actors into a performance. Some will
Yes.
just gently encourage,
Some
and
will intimidate, and
some
some
will
will.
intimidate.
Some
Right,
will
right.
put the gun down. Yep, absolutely.
Uh,
But
uh,
what was it like producing, since you were on such a tight schedule? With this particular record, were there lots of takes, or was it like let's just get everything we can as quickly as we can?
there were, depended on the song.
Okay.
Occasionally we'd get it on the first take, but for the most part, they would play until I was literally jumping up and down in the control room saying, "That's it, that's the one." And we'd listen back, and if it met to the band's expectations, we then had it. It wasn't like, because generally when I produced, I was also engineering. So it isn't like I could run into the studio room as some producers like Ross Robinson and several others go into the studio and become a member of the band and jump up and down with them. I was sitting behind the console, although there was definitely a big enough window that they could see what I was doing and what I was feeling and when I was smiling and when I was scowling, so that I was definitely directing them from the control room.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the record that we began talking about, was that the second of the three that you did with them, or was it? Do you remember? Do
You
you
know,
remember?
I'm not really sure. I thought it was the last of the three when they finally asked Max to co-produce with them, but I could be wrong. It could have been the second.
I think six is the last of the three that you
You
did.
know something? It would have been the second then, because six
Yeah,
was the last one that we did. Um,
and you were sole producer on the last one, isn't that correct?
yes.
So what's the difference with two guys trying to produce and one guy?
Well, Max was what you'd call pretty much he did not come and sit in the control room for 3 weeks while we did the album. I would send him uh,
Dailies.
like yeah, what you might call dailies, and get comments back from him. Um, and I was pretty much the on-site producer.
Okay.
When you're co-producing, or say you're producing on your own, so you're the mix engineer and producer, did you take two different rates for that, or was it all just kind of the same rate?
We would negotiate a rate out before they even loaded in.
Hmm.
For the complete total session, or
For everything that was going to happen in X number of days,
right?
and I would just
So,
you know I oftentimes with bands like that would go a lower rate than I might go for
sure.
a multi-platinum American or English band, uh, just because I
The
really
budget.
loved the guys and what they were doing, and you know would try to have compassion for what budgets they had.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, as far as like a record like that, I don't really know how well it did in America. I'd never heard of them until I met you, and but you said it received gold status, so I'm sure they made their money back. But
And when they came to play concerts, they did a series of concerts in America. They were always like sellout concerts, so obviously people were listening and aware.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Steven, you got to remember, man. We grew up in the
Jeez.
South. We grew up like right outside
Well,
of Mobile,
I don't
Alabama.
think
There
they had
wasn't.
a part of their tour down in
Right,
Pensacola,
yeah.
right.
No,
That's the thing. Yeah.
no, but
but they definitely went places like Tucson and
right.
Fresno and Gallup, New Mexico, and throughout the
Hmm.
Southwest and Texas and stuff like that. And nowadays, I'll get a call from bands like El Tree, and they'll be in Chicago doing a concert,
Wow. Well,
or New York.
there's huge Spanish-speaking populations throughout America now, so
Sure,
Yeah.
and in Florida too, just not
yeah, yeah,
necessarily
yeah.
where we were born and
Yeah.
raised.
Well, but I was saying, living in Europe, it was the same sort of thing. You had these huge acts that would just, engross the whole culture, and yet you talk about them in America, I've never heard of it. Never,
Yeah.
you know.
Pass. Never heard of
Yeah, exactly. That's always fascinated me, that if you can have an artist that can skip borders like that and still be huge is quite a
Hmm.
task. Well, any further thoughts on this particular production, or
Well, I think that this was one of my favorite bands to work with, as actually all of the South American bands I worked with would fall into that category for a number of reasons. One, by the time they got to come to the United States to record an album, they were accomplished musicians. They were great.
mhm,
You weren't working with some amateurs who had had a one-hit wonder and were trying to, piece together a second song or a second album. And more importantly for me, they wanted to have fun. They were coming in not so that they could pick you in the studio apart and so that they could be their big egotistical,
Who are you talking
fi-
about?
finicky, picky selves, but so that they could come into the studio. We'd have barbecues, we'd have uh, parties with their friends from the Los Angeles area, and we just had fun. We'd eat good food every night. These are people who knew how to make an enjoyable experience out of the hard work of making an album.
That's
Awesome.
nice. It sounds really nice.
Well, let me just tell everybody that this is our 7th podcast, and we are available in several mediums. First of which is youtube.com/StudioRatHQ. Second one is on Podomatic, but you don't have to necessarily go to Podomatic to hear the podcast. That is without video. You can get that at www.studiorathq.com, and you'll see all of the podcasts and little bars that you can actually listen to and download. Another avenue, if you're interested, is iTunes. You simply go into iTunes store and you type studio, then the word rat, then the word HQ, and all of our podcasts should show up there. We'd really like to have dialogue with people that are listening to the show. And the best way to do that is with Facebook, facebook.com/StudioRatHQ.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also, and I mentioned it in the previous podcast, there's a second page that's been around a lot longer that is called RIP Indigo Ranch. And that is particularly.
Rest in peace,
Yeah.
Indigo Ranch,
Right.
which was formed by someone without my knowledge. And then I was given an email saying, why don't you check out RIP Indigo Ranch, and was like, oh, wait, wow, that's about my place.
Yeah, there's a
And
fan.
somebody had started a website and then turned me over some administrative privileges, and that page has gotten an awful lot of hits of people who are interested in where the indigo sound came from
Right.
and what came of it.
Right, that was established by a friend of the ranch. And you can also, so we double post everything is what I'm trying to say, so that first go to StudioRat HQ, because this is a StudioRat HQ performance, but just in case, you can also see it at RIP Indigo Ranch Studios. And
yeah, please, people, hit me up if you want. I mean, if you want to talk, I'm getting, like I said on the last podcast, I'm getting a lot of emails and friend requests from folks from South America, and for the most part, my English is good, but my Spanish not as much. But I'll try. And it's definitely, yeah, I want to know about bands too. If anybody's got bands, man, send me some links. I love new music.
Also, we were I put out a request on the Facebook and Indigo Ranch Facebook pages is show us your studios and your gear too.
Oh, that would be sweet. I've been to some good ones in LA, man.
The Indigo Ranch collection is vast, and it's very unique, one of the biggest in the world. And but that doesn't, let's see what you got and show us what you use to make music or how you record people. It's just a big community thing here for us.
Yeah, and if you want to be on it, if you're in one of the bands, that we've talked about, and you want to be on it, please let us know, because we'd love
to have you.
We'd love to do a reissue of the podcast or an update with another one of the people besides Richard who are actually there.
Right. Any other comments or ideas, anybody?
I'm having a great time with this. Thanks.
Yep. It's always an honor to speak with you guys. And as usual, same rat time, same rat channel. And we'll see you next time.